Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. In an unprecedented move that nobody, including myself, saw coming, I've gone and made a second video. So welcome everyone to video 2, Electric Boogaloo. Before we get into it, I want to let you know that this is a follow-up to my earlier video, Does Formula 1 Have a Wheel Problem? A video that got at least a couple more views than I had anticipated. I will be going a bit more in-depth into the failures of the last season, adding the poor neglected incidents of 2022 to the list, and taking a brief look through history to see if these issues are truly out of the ordinary. If you haven't seen the previous video, I would strongly recommend giving it a watch before this one. But if you're a rebel and aren't interested in doing the homework, here's a refresher of the important bits. I identified 7 incidents throughout the 2023 Formula 1 season that all involved the failure of a wheel rim which led to a tyre separating from the car. One of these airborne tyres struck Daniel Ricciardo's rear wing, severely damaging it. These incidents followed the 2022 rule changes. The most important being a change from 13 to 18-inch rims, a reduction in the tyre sidewall height, and the decision to make I'm sorry, what? Alright Germany, I'll play your games. And the decision to make BBS Kraftfahrzeugtechnik the sole supplier for all the teams. It appeared that all of these incidents were due to a partial or total failure of the outer lip of the wheel rim, leaving the tyre unretained. And I recommended a possible yet unlikely solution of modifying the rims to contain a bead lock on the inside edge. This could potentially hold the tyres in place should the outside of the rim fail. And you're all caught up on the relevant points. Before we get into it, I want to offer a massive thank you to all of those non-rebels who spent their valuable time watching the previous video. And a second thank you to everyone who took it a step further by liking, commenting and subscribing. The immense and honestly undeserved support has been absolutely incredible, and is well beyond anything I could have dreamt of. I didn't expect, and I was wholly unprepared for the level of engagement the video received, and to be honest, I was left completely overwhelmed. I honestly expected my little project to amass a couple of views and then to be lost to the deep, dark depths of YouTube while someone far larger and far more knowledgeable eventually caught on and did their own piece on it. So I've been thrown into the deep end here and I'm going to do my best to swim. And thirdly, a thank you to all those who offered their invaluable criticism and critique, which I've used as a bit of a loose guide for this video. And this gives me the perfect opportunity to see how people react to going a little deeper than surface level and using some numbers and some mild analysis in videos. First of all, it appears I need to get my eyes checked because I missed an incident in 2023. A number of kind commenters were nice enough to point out that Yuki Tsunoda lost a tyre in Azerbaijan. He drifted wide on turn 13, possibly due to a front wing failure, hit the wall in a similar fashion to Magnussen in Australia, leading to that characteristic failure that we're all here to talk about. And this makes number 8 on our 2023 list. And then something I feel I need to do is show that these incidents are indeed the outliers. I don't want to make it sound like these wheels just fall apart every time someone sneezes on them the wrong way. They have taken bashes and crashes without causing the tyre to come off before, and I'm going to use Nico Hülkenberg in Monaco to highlight this. He slightly misjudged the Nouvelle chicane and clipped the inside barrier with his rear left wheel. This led to the tyre completely deflating. However, the rim remained mostly intact. Exactly what I want to see in every incident, as this meant that the now flat tyre was still retained on the rim and it allowed him to drive back to the pits without too much issue. Back to the problems at hand, and something that was notably missing from the first video. Making a video following the impacts of 2022 rule changes and then focusing on 2023 seems rather daft in hindsight. My reasoning was simply that 2023 was fresh in my mind and 2022 was a bit fuzzy in my memory at this point. But it really should have been there, so allow me to quickly cover the 6 2022 incidents now. The first in Saudi Arabia, one of Mick Schumacher's very expensive crashes of the season. He hit the wall hard in Q2, which led to a loss of both his right wheels, one being a rim failure and a loose tyre, and I believe the other was also a tether failure. The second came in Australia, a rather clumsy misunderstanding between Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi in Q1. This left his rim smashed to pieces and his tyre making its way down the track on its own accord. The next came during the Miami Grand Prix, where a rim-to-rim contact between Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly left Norris sitting in a McLaren tricycle. A rather clear example of the classic failure of these wheel rims where the outer edge is completely gone following the contact. The fourth was the big one of the season. The absolutely massive crash involving Zhou Guanyu, George Russell, and Pierre Gasly contains a little hidden wheel failure for good measure. Before Zhou was even part of the incident, the contact between Russell and Gasly had caused Russell's rim to fail and his tyre to begin parting ways with his car. But more on this incident later. Then there was a crash in the US Grand Prix on lap 22 between Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. The tread-to-tread contact sent Alonso momentarily airborne as Stroll's rear wheel was completely destroyed. It's worth mentioning that it took far longer for the tyre to actually detach from the car, arguably the most ideal or safest form of failure if this were to contain some strange form of tier list. What's this? 2022 USA. Oh, that's an S if I've ever seen one. Absolutely beautiful. And then the final incident that I could identify occurred in Brazil on the first lap of the race, where a clumsy little contact between Daniel Ricciardo and Kevin Magnussen left Magnussen's Haas in a spin, unfortunately coming back around, and it came into contact with Ricciardo again, specifically with his rear wheel, and this completely separated the tyre from its rim. So that makes 6 total incidents that I could find in 2022 with the same flavour as 2023's 8, bringing us to a total of 14 that we can now use for some amateurish investigation. The most critique I received was a request to show how these incidents differ to the past, more analysis into them, and to show what's actually happening. Everyone knows that you need a balanced content diet, so please allow me to garnish your word salad with some meaty data. But bear with me, the chef is only new and the meat may be a little dry. First and foremost, allow me to make it clear that these incidents are not new to Formula One. Tyres have come off plenty of times in the past, but don't allow this to diminish the seriousness of these events. I really want to hammer home the sheer abundance of these failures in comparison with the previous generations. I mentioned before that there was a single loose tyre in both the 2020 and the 2021 seasons. 2 data points though isn't the most scientific of methods, so I've gone through all of the seasons from 2012 until now, doing my best to sift through every highlight reel and compilation I can find to offer you a list. This will give us 10 seasons of old gen cars and the 13-inch wheels to compare with our 2 seasons of new gen cars and the 18-inch wheels. Naturally, I'm ignoring tether failures and looking specifically for rim failures leading to errant tyres. And that list is 1 in 2012 involving Pastor Maldonado in Monaco's third practice. I'm unsure if that's a tether or a rim failure here, so I've elected to count it. 2 in 2013, the first Romain Grosjean also in Monaco's third practice, and the second between Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton in Brazil. 1 in 2014 involving Kimi Raikkonen in Britain, 2 in 2015, a big one by Daniel Kvyat in Japan qualifying. I'm also not sure if this is a tether failure or a rim, so I've counted it as well. And the other, Grosjean in Russia. A single one in 2016 was the huge crash between Fernando Alonso and Esteban Gutierrez in Australia. 2017 didn't contain any. 2018 contained 2. The first was that particularly stupid incident in Spain involving Grosjean. And it's not lost on me how many times Grosjean comes up in this, but we're above such low-hanging joke fruit. And the second happened to Esteban Ocon in France. A single occurrence in 2019 between teammates Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc. The footage showed the tyre just hanging onto the rim after the incident, but since it looks like an aggressive sneeze would take it off the rim, I decided to count it. 2020 contained the incident that we previously covered in Britain, and 2021 had the other incident that was between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. So this list gives us a total of 12 failures across the 10 seasons prior to the 2022 rule change. Naturally, only 2 data points for the current era is a little statistically iffy, but without consulting a psychic, that's all I have to work with. So we can compare it with our 14 incidents in 22 and 23. In other words, an average of 1.2 tyres lost per season in the prior 10 years of the 13-inch era versus an average of 7 per season in the new 18-inch era. If we go a little deeper, because numbers are just so thrilling, historically Formula One had less races per season. Adding yet another variable to this. I did the numbers already, they are 19.9 races per season in the previous 10 years and 22 per season in our current 2 years. This takes us to 0.06 failures per race in the 13-inch era and an average of 0.32 per race in the 18-inch era. In other words, approximately 5.3 times more failures in the 18-inch era if we take the number of races into account. Now, I'm not going to do the maths on any more variables on the issue, like historically having more teams and that means more cars on the grid, and current eras containing sprints, which means there's more miles and more potential incidents. I'm going to leave it as a rough value of 5 times more failures in the current era. Please understand that I'm making this video for fun, not as a college thesis.
What do you want from me?
We want the numbers, Mason. That's all we've ever wanted.
Now that I've decided that we all agree, we can see that while these types of failures were indeed present in the previous seasons, the introduction of 2022 rule change saw a huge jump in these failures. So let's take a closer look into what's actually happening. First of all, looking to see what the contacts are that are causing these failures. I've boiled them down to the simplest characteristic of what contact initiated the incident. In this, I found 3 different scenarios. For the first, we have an impact with a wall, which we have 6 examples of, best shown in the now iconic case of Kevin Magnussen in Australia when he drifted wide on the exit of turn 2 and grazed the wall. The second, an impact rim to rim. With a total of 4 events, I'm going to give you 2 examples here of different ways a rim-to-rim contact can be made. These are also applicable to wall contacts, but the footage of them just isn't as good. In 2022, in Brazil between Kevin Magnussen and Daniel Ricciardo, Magnussen's spinning Haas made direct lateral contact with Ricciardo's rear wheel. And in 2023, when Lewis Hamilton came together with George Russell in Qatar, by running alongside, contact was made between each other's rims. And then third, impact tread to tread, also with 4 occurrences, which was best observed in Brazil 2023 when Esteban Ocon drove straight into Fernando Alonso and came off far, far worse. All 3 of these different forms of impact had the same outcome, a failure of the rim and a tyre detaching from the car. A little deeper than that, there were 2 different failure states of the rims themselves. The first was a complete structural failure of the rim, only happening on 2 occasions in 2022. Those being in Saudi Arabia when Schumacher had an unfortunate disagreement with a wall, and in Australia when a misunderstanding between Stroll and Latifi left Latifi's wheel more resembling a modern art piece. And I think it took a bit more effort than most modern art does as well. And then the main failure, which is honestly my focus, was evident in every other incident. It's a partial or total loss of the outer edge of the wheel rim, leaving little to no material to retain the tyre after the impact. Put a pin in that piece right there, just like last video's Krispy Kreme, it's going to come back down later. Almost all of the incidents appeared to show this failure of the outer lip of the rim, which is what led me to the belief that the rims have been so heavily designed with weight saving in mind that BBS have inadvertently made them so thin that they shatter apart at this important junction just at the edge of the wheel spokes leading to the outer lip. This led me to think of a relatively simple design modification that may help with these issues. BBS, if you've somehow stumbled onto this video, feel free to test this out. It may serve to strengthen the wheel just a little bit in this important area to restrict some of the incidents from occurring. If the rim is failing just off the edges of the spokes, then it may pay to dish the spokes the tiniest bit, similar to these old 13-inch rims pictured. This should add a little bit more support leading up to the lip of the wheel. Unfortunately, this will add more weight, and as we know, weight is the enemy, but some strength in this area may help to curb the issues. Now, I'll fully admit that in hindsight, my decision to use the 2020 tyre failures as a conversation point seems a little out of place, having little to no similarity to the incidents of today. My point was to show that in previous years, the tyres appeared to adhere to the rims quite well, which would have been a rather useful trait right now. The general consensus from people was that they use an adhesive to bond the rim and the tyre together. More on this later. As for a conversation on the actual dangers of these issues, first let's look away from the driver and the halo, and look outward for more possible consequences. The 2023 Australian Grand Prix seems to be the rather unfortunate gift that keeps on giving. It's time for that piece of Magnussen's wheel rim to return. It's important to understand that these wheel rims appear to fail by shattering apart. This leaves us with, for all intents and purposes, magnesium shrapnel, something I had neglected to mention in the previous video. It turns out that Will Street, a spectator, was struck by that piece of rim. This incident luckily did not cause him massive injury, just a gash to his arm. However, Will was quoted, "The piece of debris was quite large. Standing right next to me was my fiancée and she's a bit shorter than me. So where it hit me in the arm, it probably would have hit her right in the head. Honestly, I'm feeling pretty lucky it wasn't worse." Unquote. I don't think we need to get into a conversation about the problems inherent with pieces of metal hitting people in the head. It was mentioned in the comments that carbon composite rims could present a solution. Carbon composite everything seems to be the new in thing in motorsport at the moment, but my background is entirely in metals. Composites are well beyond my scope of knowledge. But from my limited understanding, composites offer very little give. Often not flexing or bending, they have this rather nasty habit of fracturing and shattering. So as far as I understand, they wouldn't offer any greater reliability than a conventional metallic rim, just offering an overall lighter package. But if we have any experts among us, please let me know down below. And then comes the flying tyres, which was the original issue that got me interested in this. It doesn't take much to realise that they present a clear and present danger to fans and track marshals alike. Now please remember for added context that the following events were entire wheels that got loose, not just the tyre. The unfortunate losses of 2 marshals in the 2000 Italian Grand Prix and the 2001 Australian Grand Prix serve as grim reminders that wheels being ejected from cars are no small matter to be overlooked. On the subject of fan safety, I want to draw a little attention to something that I noticed while watching the slow-mo of Zhou Guanyu's huge crash in the 2022 British Grand Prix. During that crash, it turns out that hidden in there, his rim's outer lip had also fractured apart like the incidents we've covered already. This is what leads me to believe that they are definitely using adhesive to keep the tyres attached to the rims, as many commenters stated. While we're talking about dangers to crowds, I want to pose the hypothetical situation where that tyre had been flicked off the rim when he rolled over the tyre barrier. In theory, there's a chance that the tyre could have been thrown directly into the grandstand behind that fence. This thankfully didn't happen, but I feel it's worth pointing out as a hypothetical. So back to the cars and drivers. We have the magnesium shrapnel that can more than easily cause tyre punctures, and they may well be able to bypass the halo if they're on the correct trajectory, something that the IndyCar aero screen shows far more capability of preventing. Not that I necessarily like the aesthetics of the aero screen, just as an observation on its effectiveness as a safety device. And then we have the tyres, the big 11.5 kilo forbidden Krispy Kremes of the Formula One world. It's a difficult debate to have whether or not they pose a danger to the driver's head given the halo's existence. But I often subscribe to Murphy's Law until proven otherwise. And I stand by the fact that I would prefer the tyres remain on the car instead of in the air and landing on others' cars. As a bit of a tangent, I saw some discussion about the idea that spec parts are a safer option than teams developing their own. This is always an interesting conversation to me. As a side note, I feel like this almost inherently goes against the spirit of Formula One, a sport where an entire team of people, not just a driver, strives to create the very best piece of machinery they can to compete against other teams doing the very same. It's as much an engineering competition as it's a fight between strategy and driving. All of these components together are what make racing. Spec parts can be safer, in the long run especially once all the kinks are worked out, but this isn't a hard and fast rule. Keeping this Australia-centric, the new Gen 3 V8 supercars debuted last year, and they're a prime example. I haven't worked in supercars since 2022, but the introduction of Gen 3 brought many more controlled components to the cars, and this year was absolutely riddled with failures of these parts that weren't up to the task, to the point where they were literally running out of spares on race weekends, and the teams were left frustrated as they had no control over the issues. And when interviewed on component failures in comparison with the previous generation cars, Tickford team principal Tim Edwards said, quote, "This is slightly different because we had a lot more scope to do things ourselves back then. Now we've just got to sit back and go, well, that's not good enough, can we please redesign that?" Unquote. The ability for the teams to develop their own parts simply allows them to make modifications on the fly to address issues as they come about, giving them a racing advantage over their competition who haven't done this development, and it really shows who the best engineers are if they can preempt the issue to begin with. Whereas now, the teams are beholden to BBS making a modification to the spec rim and everyone is stuck in the same boat. Circling back to the Zhou Guanyu crash in Britain, there was a very interesting note worthy of a gold star. If the rims are failing and the tyres detach, it's possible that there is less likelihood of seeing cars getting flipped like this. These massive crashes are often due to a tread-to-tread contact between the tyres, where the rear tyre drives over the tyre ahead of it and it sends the car airborne. If the rim fails and the tyre's deflated before the car makes any headway skyward, then there's an argument to be made that this could well be the lesser of two evils. But let's not forget, the Zhou incident happened in 2022, the year that the new rims were introduced. So we can't say that the new rims have stopped the flipping incidents altogether, only that they may have reduced their likelihood. The comparison was made between the Zhou crash and Hamilton in Qatar. These two incidents unfortunately are not similar. I've already shown that Hamilton made contact rim to rim, not imparting any of the forces that a tread-to-tread contact may contain. But an interesting comparison could be made with Latifi in Australia and Ocon in Brazil, both being tread-to-tread incidents, and unlike Zhou, instead of sending the car skyward, they broke the corner's suspension and threw the wheel up instead. This makes me feel that the Zhou incident is a bit more of a unicorn case where there are a lot more factors present than I'm capable of investigating or explaining. But it's an interesting thought that I have to concede to, and it may be worth some investigation in the future. The potential positive effects of parts of the car designed to fail before everything else gets out of hand. Basically the equivalent of having a burst panel on a manifold. Luckily, it would appear that Formula 1 is looking to solve a handful of its issues in the 2026 regulations change. With a rather optimistic target of taking roughly 50 kilos off their rather chunky cars, it would seem that taking 20 kilos off may be a little more realistic, and also a much needed reduction in the car's dimensions given how big they've grown. And most importantly for this conversation, a revision of the wheels. The current talk appears to be around a reduction to 16 inches. A rather nice middle ground between 13 and 18 inches. At the bare minimum, this reduction in diameter should assist in reducing the forces experienced at the rim's outer lip, and on top of that, hopefully they're going to be revising the structure to be far more robust, and we shouldn't see nearly as many incidents involving magnesium shrapnel and flying tyres. But anyway, if you've made it all the way through the video, thank you, you're an absolute legend. And if you enjoyed yourself, please consider liking, commenting or subscribing. And that's enough for today. Thank you for your time.
And the tyre comes off like a polo mint. Luckily stays within the confines of the racetrack.
Goddamn right.